All right. Today we're going to look at the foundations of civilization. It's very sort of a short, brief little section here. So we'll get started on this. What we're looking at is soon after the Neolithic Revolution and the development of agriculture, people in permanent settlements. So you could live in your own, house. You could grow your own food. You didn't have to move in search of food. People in permanent settlements advanced more rapidly than hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers, remember, they were so fixated on survival. They had to hunt, they had to gather, they had to move in search of food. They were nomadic. They couldn't just settle down and, I guess stop and smell the roses, if you would. They couldn't just stop and think about things. And so people who lived in permanent settlements would advance more quickly because they had more time on their hands. They didn't have to hunt for food. There was a food surplus. And, they did really, really move much more rapidly than hunter-gatherers. So we're looking at the four cradles of civilization. And the four cradles here, you're going to have a map that you need to color and label that's just similar to this one right here. The cradles of civilization are the beginning, the dawn of civilization. A cradle is what you put a baby in, so this is the beginning of civilization, are found in river valleys. Okay, and you see the four river valleys that we're talking about right there. So when we look at this map, it's not filled out for us. We'll look at the one that is filled out for us, but I do want you to color that map and label it and send it back in. Why river valleys? Okay, why? Well, always, whenever we talk about history, people will say, history, you just learn about random things that happen throughout time. Well, but the real question is why? Why did this happen? How can we, improve on this? All these things that you look at. So, why did they settle in river valleys? River valleys provided rich soil and irrigation waters. Okay, when the rivers flooded, it left rich soil behind. This was a key to the river valleys being successful because in a lot of places, let's say that you had dirt out here somewhere in Henry County, okay, soil. Well, after you grow a couple crops on it, you deplenish that soil. You take all the nutrients out of it, and so you have to do something to put those nutrients back in. Okay, and that sometimes it involves growing a crop and just cutting it down, or something like that. But we call that erosion. So erosion is one reason that rich soil wasn't around all the time. If you used it, then eventually you deplete the minerals and the nutrients in that soil. The river valleys would flood yearly and provide this rich soil, and the river valley civilizations could grow crops over and over all year long. Okay. Also provided irrigation waters. People back then would dig all types of irrigation, ways to transport their water to their crops. And basically, that's why one of the main reasons they used the river valley to grow food. River valleys also provided protection from invasion. A river, you even think about the Dan River, Danville. Ancient people could not cross that river. Okay, swimming and stuff like that. Very difficult to swim across a river that's flowing in at least somewhat quickly. Boats and things like that did not exist during this time, early into civilization. So the river valleys provided protection, and people were relatively safe for many, many years there. When we look at some of these, like Egypt is a great example. Egypt is a place that was frequently invaded after the fact. And we'll talk about that as we go on. All right, so we're going to look at the four river valleys. The first river valley that you need to know is the Nile River Valley. It is the only river valley that is located in Africa. Okay, all the other river valley civilizations are located in Asia. Nile River Valley is where Egyptian civilization began. If you'll notice, this is a satellite image, and if you look at the very top, it looks almost like a fan at the end of the Nile. The Nile is a river that flows from the south to the north. It's a little bit odd, into the Mediterranean. That fan looking thing up there at the top, which really kind of green or kind of greenish brown, is the Nile Delta. So the Nile Delta is located up there at the very top of the Nile. This empties out into the Mediterranean. Very rich soil, very fertile, sort of crops. Egypt is, at least for the ancient world, was known as the breadbasket of the world because the Nile River would flood and they could grow food all year long. They had an abundance of food and they fed, you look at the Greeks, the Romans, they fed a great deal of, the world, the ancient world, when those people didn't have access to such resources, especially like the Romans. We'll talk a lot about Rome and Egypt together a little bit later as we go along. So the Tigris and Euphrates River Valley is what we call Mesopotamia. If you look at that map, and some of these maps aren't the greatest maps, but you'll see Mesopotamia in between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. This is the very first civilization known to man. The development of writing comes from Mesopotamia, specifically Sumer and the Sumerians. And Mesopotamia that you see right there, in between two rivers, lots of fertile land, once again, due to flooding and things like that. This is the very first civilization located in modern day Iraq. Okay, and we'll talk about them as we go along as well. All right, this one should be the easiest one. Indian civilization is located in the Indus River Valley. You see that green area. This is the Indus River. Eventually, you'll learn about the Ganges, but right now we just want to know about the Indus River. This is Indian civilization. India is probably one of the most fascinating sort of civilizations to me because of Hinduism, Buddhism, things like that. And we'll talk about them again as we go along. All right, the Huang He or Huang Ho River is also known as the Yellow River. It's also known as the River of Sorrows because very unpredictable flooding kills a lot of people, especially in ancient times. Chinese people, if you think about China today, China is the most populated country in the world with over 1 billion people. One of the reasons is just a really old civilization. If you look at those, especially if you look at like up at the top there, you look at the Gobi Desert to the north, the Mongols and Mongolia to the north. And this isn't like the best map, but it gives you an idea of where, the Huang He flows from and why it was so important to Chinese civilization. All right, so once again, what do you need to know for the quiz? All right, where did the earliest civilizations form? Egyptian civilization is the Nile River Valley and the Nile River Delta in Egypt. Mesopotamian civilization located in the Tigris and Euphrates. Indian civilization, the Indus River Valley, South Asia. And then the Chinese civilization, the Huang He or Huang Ho, Yellow River, and or River of Sorrows, if you want to, add that in. And it's located in East Asia. Now, for your map that you need to complete, the 4 old world river valley cultures. Look over to your left. In the purple, you'll find Egypt and the Nile. This is where that's located. The only river valley civilization located in Africa. Note in the pinkish red, you have Mesopotamia and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Okay. India, you have in the green. You really want to focus on the Indus River Valley civilization is where you'll find India, and then we'll talk about the Ganges a little bit more. If you look over at the yellow, don't be confused by the Yangtze, which is below the yellow. All right, the Yangtze River is a river that flows at the bottom, but the one that's in yellow and appropriately colored yellow is the Yellow River or the Huanghe River, China. Okay. Now, when we talk about civilizations, what is civilization? All right, civilization is basically a complex culture that can produce a surplus of food, meaning they grow food, they can store it, they domesticate animals, etc., etc. Put an animal in a fence, eggs, milk, all those things, and they can kill the animal for food. Establish towns or cities with a government. You look at what we have. We live in a civilized country, a civilized world. And if you look at like a city, let's just even take something as simple as Martinsville. Martinsville has a government. They have a city council. They have, if it was a town, it'd be a town council. All right, so you have cities, towns that have governments. A division of labor is what comes next. Division of labor is what we have in America, and it's really, really, evident when you think about all the type of jobs that there are for people to perform in America or even in this area. For example, division of labor, you have teachers. I can't teach math, okay? Math is probably not my best subject. So I have a job as a history teacher while someone else who's an expert in math teaches math. You have people that work at fast food. You have people who work as police officers. You have doctors. You have lawyers. You have all types of people that perform different jobs in the city, in the county, in the United States. So you have a division of labor. The four cradles of civilization share common features. They flood periodically. Climate is generally warm or hot. There's little rainfall. That one is odd to people because when you think about fertile, or at least around here, let's say if you're growing tobacco or whatever the new thing is, you're growing tobacco here, or corn or whatever, you want rain so that your crop will grow. So you have to irrigate water from ponds and things like that. Little rainfall, though, here is actually a short rain season that causes the floods. And then that fertile soil comes from the flooding of the river. So you don't really need that much rain. All right, cradles of civilization, irrigation and flood control systems were developed. Governments arose to organize public works. So you have governments that basically provide the public works, all sorts of government sort of bureaucracy. You think about for example, think about ours, the public works. What's a good example? In a year or so, maybe less for some of you, you're going to be trying to go to a public works sort of organization called the DMV to get your driver's license. So, governments arose basically to organize public works, to tax people, to bring in money, to build things, to make the community better. One thing that you see here with increase of food, you see an increase of population. Why is that? So imagine if you're a hunter-gatherer in the Paleolithic era and you're hunting for food constantly. Well, a mother who is pregnant might be malnourished. Okay, a baby might not be, I guess what you would say, necessarily in a healthy sort of environment. All right, as you have access to food, women can bring babies to term easier. You have a much more, higher birth rate, a lower infant mortality rate, meaning, less children are born and then die. So as population increases, as food increases, you are going to have a population increase. The more food you have, the increase in population. Increased population provide labor for public buildings. Trade is going to start to be a big thing. Artisans are skilled workers. If you could make great pottery for people to store their grain, then people would want to trade with you. Okay, they want to get something that they need and give you something that you need. So you would see someone trade a pot or some kind of container for grain itself, or for a chicken or a goat. Okay, this is a barter economy, a trade economy. We'll look at when that changes soon. But the barter economy is a trade economy. Cultural diffusion occurs, the spread of ideas from one area through trade. Cultural diffusion is an interesting thing because it's something that you don't even really think about. It's just something that happens. When you go to another area, you learn their ideas, their beliefs, and all sorts of things about their culture. And a lot of people like that and will adopt, certain aspects of that culture. Okay, so the spread of ideas, you're learning one way to do it, and then you teach someone else a different way to do it, and they like it and they take it. That's what you call cultural diffusion. Or even just like religion, when a lot of times, especially Islam spread a lot through travel, trade. And people who came in contact with Muslims adopted a lot of their things, like the Arabic numerals, things of that nature. Right? Other characteristics of some civilizations: development of a calendar. You look at the bottom, that is the Mayan calendar. Farmers needed to anticipate floods and know when they were coming so they could harvest their crops before flood. Development of writing eventually comes along to keep trade and government records. We're going to talk about the first writing form from the Sumerians, which is cuneiform, in the next section. Early civilizations moved into the age of metals. This is something you really don't have to know, but the Bronze Age comes around 5,000 years ago. Bronze was created, mixture of copper and tin. Iron, the Iron Age, or iron weapons were used about 3,200 years ago. Gender roles shifted in early civilizations. Initially, women had been the gatherers, men the hunters, and that made the men more important. But women developed agriculture and probably were the first farmers, which gave them some type of power back then. Now, historically, if you look at ancient times, women did not have, I guess what you would say, a good amount of power. In fact, when we talk about kings and things like that at first, you see that men are the ones who ruled most everything. Probably because the invention of the plow, pulled by animals, women just weren't strong enough to use the plow, especially the steel plow. It's very heavy, hard to steer, and this is where power shifted away from women and went to men. All right, basic activities of civilization: tool making, producing, consuming, exchanging. And that means producing a good, buying goods, consuming, and trading goods, exchanging. Transportation, whether it be throughout, a horse and whatever type of transportation that you might have. Eventually, the development of boats and stuff like that as well. Communication. Basic activities of civilization: education. Education becomes a really big thing during civilization because, you got time to sit down, learn things, okay? And really, I guess, the dawn of education comes with civilization. A lot of people take education for granted now, but back then, getting an education was important, at least to the men. In many cultures, women weren't allowed to get education. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Governing, or having a government, protecting and conserving. So armies were built eventually because you had to protect the stuff that you had, especially your food supply. Egyptians are going to learn the hard way that people are going to want to take their food from them. And then eventually religion, moral, religious, and philosophical beliefs start to become prevalent. Moral, you're looking at laws and law codes, especially like Hammurabi's code. When we talk about that, the 12 tables that focus on, doing the right thing. That's moral beliefs where if you do something wrong to someone, you have to pay the price for it. Religion comes along during this time, many religions. Early civilizations, they worshiped the sun, things that were important to them, the sun, the moon, water, things like that. And we'll look at a lot of those religious beliefs as we go along as well. And then philosophical beliefs, we'll talk about philosophy and the Greeks a little bit later on as we go. Basic activities. Well, now that you don't have to hunt for food, you can have a little fun. You can, draw, create some type of architecture, buildings, sculptures, things like that. Music, dance, literature, poetry, all these things that make life a little bit better. Recreation, sports, games, that sort of thing. One thing that separates us from hunter-gatherers and savages is basically, recreation, having fun, playing golf, playing basketball, those sorts of things today. So I've got a quiz for you on this and the archaeology part of the section. Then I'll have a test review for prehistory, and then the River Valley civilizations will be on that as well. So make sure you take the quiz, and you guys have a good day.